All right, so welcome to everyone. We have some technical difficulties on Facebook Live, so we're starting over here in just the Teams portion of it, and going to kind of start from scratch. So we are wanting to jump on here and answer questions that members have posted online, and we have two board members, Paige Gunderson and Tate from Region 3 and Region 6, as chair and co-chair of the DNA committee. Myself as executive director, and Jaelynn Reyes, who is our DNA staff coordinator in office. So we will monitor the question and answer on the chat on this town hall. So Jaelynn's going to monitor that as people put questions in. We will make sure and do that. So as we go along, if you have questions that are watching live with us, make sure and put those into this question and answers now. And we will figure out a way to get this posted to the website and maybe even to Facebook that we can share out so we have a wider audience there. So appreciate you sticking with us through technical difficulties. We're going to start with a background. So Paige, go back through kind of where we're at, where we've been, where we're going.
Okay, so to go back to the original part of the DNA conversation, we started back in 2014 with the STR testing, and that really was the launching pad for our association on making sure our pedigree was correct. And so we go up into 2015, 2019, we started looking at mandatory requirements for sires and donor dams. At September of 21, we had a board that decided that all DNA would be voluntary at that point, and that it would pass through the ABGA office. That's something I probably forgot to mention before. Prior to 21, we were averaging about 27 to 2,900 samples being tested per year, which is pretty outstanding for our association, especially when you look at that was not a long period of time. I mean, you're talking 6 or 7 years, right? In December of 2022, in that time frame, that year between the cutoff of making it voluntary into the December of 2022, the board decided to utilize $100,000 of their investment funds to help transition from the STR technology to the SNP technology, with the intent at that point to go through NEGIN. Now, I know personally at that point, I became involved in the DNA committee during that time frame, and we did look at multiple companies. I know there was 3 of them for sure that the DNA committee discussed at length. The 2 that rose to the top were UC Davis, which we had already been utilizing for the STR testing, and NEGIN. At that point in time, the board and the committee had rallied behind the company of NEGIN, and at that point, we were working through the transition process. Due to multiple factors, we never actually did the transition, right? So we bring it to July 2024. There was different scenarios that were brought forward, one from myself and one from another board member at the time, one rallying for UC Davis, one giving information about NEGIN. We presented that to the board, and as we'll talk later about the pros of UC Davis, the board decided to go through UC Davis as our testing company. Now, fast forward to December 2024, we finalized the contract with UC Davis for our SNP testing and SNP combo with STR, which I know we'll talk about a little bit more down the road here. I want people to keep in mind with this, there was a lot of thought put into this. In just this time frame, I've talked about 10 years of DNA talks and 3 years of research and development on which technology to use, what the transition needs to look like, and pricing and all the conversations. So there is a misconception out there that this is kind of being foisted on everybody in a hurry. It has been a discussion that's been happening for 3 years with multiple board members, multiple committee members. That has changed ever since I've been on the committee, which has been 3 years now. And I can tell you that there was a lot of research and time and effort put into making these decisions. What got us really kind of towards that rushed feeling was towards the end of December, we were trying to finalize budgets. We were trying to finalize pricing and vouchers and answer questions on that. So I want you guys to remember that there was a lot of volunteer effort to make this happen, and it took a lot of man hours and a lot of time. Currently, we've had over 30,000 requests for DNA since the inception of the program, that all being STR, but that's a pretty impressive number for our association. So I look forward to what we're going to do in the future, and I think there's a bright future with the technology change for our association at large.
Awesome. And I think we may be back live on Facebook as well. So we're kind of have people joining us live on 2 different platforms, but hopefully people are able to join. So now we're going to talk about, I think this is where we got cut off on the original feed, is Kyle, talk us through what is the difference between STR and SNP, or what we refer to as SNP testing. Members may not, these may be just, if we're not familiar with that and we're not geneticists and we haven't done DNA tests before, even if we have, walk us through what we need to know and why we're moving from STR to SNP at this point in time and why it's beneficial.
Yeah, so and I'm not a geneticist either, so I'm not going to go into trying to explain these very complex issues. I'm going to try and keep it very, very simple. STR is kind of the old school technology that first was rolled out several years ago, and it's very limited in its scope of how many sites and alleles and markers it can look at. You're talking in the 15-ish range on STR, where when we transition to SMP, we're talking 80, 90, 100, depending on the species or the breed or and how much research is done, much even more and above 100. And so it's much more accurate. I look at it this way: 9 out of 10 and 90 out of 100 are both 90%, but you have to be accurate 10 times more often to be accurate at 90 out of 100 versus 9 out of 10. So when you're looking at 15 versus 115 markers or sites, you can be that much more accurate in your parentage or anything. The other limitation of STR is those animals that are siblings or flush mates. There is a limitation sometimes because we're looking at such a small number of markers. The ability to determine accurately between 2 flush mate brothers which one is the actual sire of that kid, and so by moving to SMP, we have much more that spread out over much more areas to look for that. And this is also we're behind the 8 ball in the boar goats as far as moving to this SMP technology. The beef industry and the swine and those other livestock species have already been utilizing this for several years. And this is just the groundwork to be able to move on to those future projects of EPDs and performance data and performance testing. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything tonight. This isn't a overnight. It magically tells us all these things. There's lots more input, lots more work, lots more breeder and member input and participation to go to reach those points. But this is the groundwork, the base level, step 1 to prepare us to move on to the next step.
Paige just sent a note. I don't know if any of you guys have the Facebook pulled up. It might have been me. I didn't think it was playing through there, but he said we're getting a little feedback from if you have the Facebook Live pulled up, to make sure and get that muted, so it's not playing back through the Teams meeting. That they're getting a little feedback from that. Okay, thanks, Kyle, for that. And we'll go through more of that as we go through the night on what SNP testing can do now, what it cannot do currently, but where it sets us up for the future. And this is a move for the future of the association. This allows things down the road for us to make progress as an association that STR testing would not allow us to do. So Paige hit a little bit, go into a little more detail on why that decision back in July 24 was made to stick with UC Davis and some of the benefits that we have for sticking with UC Davis for our members.
So I would say the biggest thing is to factor in those 30,000 samples that we have at UC Davis. One of the problems with Neogen is we weren't able to continue to reference those as far as the STR parentage verification. We could only do SNP tests. So we'd have to move those over and get full genomes with a SNP test on file within Neogen. With UC Davis, we can still STR verify as long as you're doing an STR combo test where you have the STR that matches to the old parentage. So that would be really beneficial in a scenario where you have to do a sire search, right, through the database if you're doing that STR combo. But you're still putting a genome on file and still moving us forward by having that. So eventually you'll be able to do an SNP sire search, right? So that was the main big takeaway for why UC Davis was a big win for us. There was a faster return on investment for people to not have to invest in moving those sires over that maybe they used in a limited way in their herd. And I know we're going to go over that more, but that was a big thing for them is what are we doing with that 30,000 samples? Is that just thrown away? To answer that, on the Neogen part of it, we did have a route go that we would have a third-party processing company transfer those samples and store those samples and transfer them to Neogen's testing cards. The board was not comfortable, given the age of some of those samples and the quality of them, that if they have degraded at all or there was a tiny sample left, that moving them out of UC Davis's facility to this third party and then to Neogen, that we would lose some viable data there. So that was a big concern. Those 30,000 samples was a big concern for the board. The other part of it was the chain of custody coming into the office. So the cool part is when you do UC Davis, and I know Jaelynn's probably going to talk more about the steps and procedure a little bit, but the office never sees your DNA, the actual physical material. They never touch it. What you send in goes directly to UC Davis, our board-approved testing facility, right? With Neogen, that was not the case. It would have to go to a PO box and then be sent from the PO box in Texas. Once the chip was filled or we had the 96 samples, then it would go to Neogen. So to backtrack on that, I guess what the board felt was the best move at the time was to really preserve that 30,000 that the membership has invested in over the last 10 years. And then also to make sure that the office had a little bit more hands-off approach as far as your actual physical DNA material. It just made things a lot cleaner and more user-friendly for our membership.
Perfect. And one thing that I'll add to that is that UC Davis is a leading research institution, and so that I was not with the association yet, but Paige, I think that was a benefit as well, right? Is that we have a leading university on the research side that can hopefully help us down the road identify some of these markers. They've already done our testing. It's not like we're going with a second-rate company. This is a world-leading research institution.
So to really feed off of that part of it too is, yes, no matter where we go, we have to pay for our research. UC Davis isn't going to do it for free, but they are excited to help us. And they're excited when we talk about collecting phenotypical data, they're excited to help us implement programs that are going to give us quality control, to make sure our membership understands how to submit data. So as we move forward, I think UC Davis gives us a really great partner to build these programs with. And then, like you said, right there, we do have access to research facilities, to geneticists that can go through and look at, for example, one of them is coat color that they mentioned earlier last year in January or February. I think we met with UC Davis. They said that's kind of a low-hanging fruit that they can start working on right away. So as we look at grant funding, there's a lot of opportunities for us working with UC Davis.
Awesome. Okay, so one of the questions out there is, what happens to all this old STR data? Are we just throwing this away and we're disregarding all the testing that members have done, and those 30,000 tests are going to mean nothing going forward? Jaelynn, talk to us from an office standpoint and registration standpoint. What are we doing with all that data and all this money that members have spent testing on STR testing? Is that information going away? What are we grandfathering in? That term gets used a lot. walk us through this.
So any DNA that has been tested with the old technology using STRs, that is still being kept on file. We still have 100% access to it. It is not being thrown away. We are not disregarding any of that DNA. So if your animal is sire qualified, parent qualified, any of that, it will still stay the same. That is not going away. All we are doing is just moving technologies. We will still have access to old DNA on file with STR technology. So none of that will be touched. None of that will change. The only thing that will be changing in a sense of grandfathering in an animal is whenever we start our new SMP testing from an office standpoint, we have no animals on file that are SNP tested, but y'all do have animals that are STR tested. With that, UC Davis keeps all samples stored for us. So they are able to pull the sample that we have on file with UC Davis, be able to pull that and extract DNA and SNP test it. Now, it may be the case where you may have to provide more hair, or you may have to provide a semen straw, but majority of that DNA is usable to be able to transfer into SNP.
Awesome. And that's a good transition. One thing that we haven't talked about is the STR versus the SNP. And so I'm just going to add in a little bit here before the next question we had in. Actually, no, this is our next question. Kyle, you get to answer it here. Why would a member need to retest an animal that was already tested? Why, or why do we need to do a combo test? We'll talk about STR and SNP. Why are we talking about these multiple tests, and what's the difference with STR and SNP?
Yeah, so essentially it's like two computer programs. If anybody else remembers, like when Microsoft switched from Microsoft Windows to Vista, the two, even though they were both Microsoft, Windows and Vista did not communicate. The programs wouldn't translate across. Nothing jived, and that's kind of the same in a sense, kind of where we're at here. The STR map does not lay over the SMP map, and so those markers don't line up and anything like that. So the STR test just cannot translate straight across into SMP. So that's why those tests those samples have to be retested in order to, if you want them to be moved to SMP, they have to be retested.
And that, I just want to emphasize that this is something that we would either be stuck in the past for forever with STR testing. This is a decision that the board made, is that we could stay with STR testing because that's what we've always done. Or at some point, peel the Band-Aid off and say, we've got to switch to technology that can help us move us forward. Knowing that those two technologies don't talk. That's the drawback, right? That's the peeling of the Band-Aid right now that we're in, is that the only way to continue to utilize all those tests is to stay with that outdated technology that's less accurate and doesn't provide extra information that we can build on going forward. But that is a big thing for the members to know, is that these tests don't communicate to each other. So if you SNP test a buck that the sire was STR tested, those will not communicate. We will not be able to, by only doing a SNP test on a current animal and only having an STR test on a previous animal, on a parent, we cannot parent verify those alone. So there is the option that you can bring that sire forward that's STR tested, and we can SNP test that to bring it forward and get a genome on them. And then all future progeny can be parent verified to them because we have that SNP test ran on that DNA test that's already at UC Davis. Or we could do what we're going to call a combo test and do an STR and a SNP on the current animal that we have. Test by doing the STR as well. We can let the STR test talk to each other and say, okay, this animal is parent verified. Now we have the SNP going forward, and any of its progeny going forward would be SNP tested. So I want to make sure that members kind of understand that. And going into that, Paige, talk us through, when is it better to do a combo test on current animals, Or would it be better to test that previous animal that did STR in the past and go ahead and just snip that old sample and run a new test on that? In your perspective, give us some scenarios for members that could answer whether they should be testing their current animal, doing a combo STR and SNP on a current animal, or bringing those STRs forward is the terminology that's commonly used.
So really, this is where we get into it. It depends on a situation, depends on the animal. If this is a low impact, and when I say that, I mean a low one offspring sort of situation. You AI'd to a buck, it was a Hail Mary, you hope that he took, and you want to see if that kid is out of him, and maybe this is an animal that you're going to be keeping as a replacement. This would be a time frame to utilize that STR SNP combo. So what you're going to be doing is you'll test that one kid. It doesn't make sense fiscally to pay the $60, 62, 3, whatever it is, dollar point to move that genome of that buck forward, right? But in the case of, say, we're going to use a major national grand champion buck, right? And his owner decided to move him forward. It would be a huge investment opportunity or savings opportunity to move that buck forward, because that is a $60 fee one time. We're not paying that $15 over and over and over again. So it really depends on the animal's impact in your herd and whether or not you're ever going to use that sire again. If you're going to need to test against him more than 3 times, then yes, it makes sense to invest to move him forward. But if it's a one-off situation that he's not very impactful to your herd at this point in time, then no, then the combo test makes more sense. The other thing that I want to mention, there's a couple chats up here about how will it work when we're DNA testing kids this year. That really goes into the 2 tests don't talk to each other, but the STR combo test, if you, like I said, if you're looking for a buck that's in the database or you need to do a database search, the combo test is really going to be your friend, because what that does is it gives you that database, that 30,000 samples, or the 3 bucks that you tested in the past, or 30, it doesn't matter. You have access to them for parentage, right? But there will be a genome on file now for this new animal, or this animal with the SNP technology. So when that animal starts making an impact on your herd, you can just do a SNP test, parent search. So there's a lot of benefits as we move forward. This is just a super duper important for people to remember, a transition time, right? We are literally transitioning from one technology that is apples to oranges. They don't talk to each other. They don't resemble each other. They don't work together. But when we get moved over to apples, we can make apple pie, right? And that's what we need to remember, is this transition period it's uncomfortable right now, but when we get there, it's going to work really, really well.
And just to add on to that, just because, I'll use me for an example. I've got, a couple of old bucks that I used. I STR tested them. Never sold a buck kid out of any of them or anything like that. They are, and their sires were old school genetics, never tested. So they are original, marked on their papers, original sample. It doesn't make, I still have semen on those bucks. It doesn't make sense for me to move those forward, because they are original sample, and moving into SMP, they will be designated as original sample. So instances like that is another example of where it's not cost effective or not necessary to move that STR animal forward, because they're already designated in STR as the original sample of that lineage. They will be again in SMP because there's nothing to reference them back to.
Yeah, the most important part is trying to get those genomes on file for animals that are highly impactful for your herd. So if you have a buck that you utilize constantly in your herd, he's your herd sire, it makes sense to move his DNA forward into the SMP testing.
Yeah, and I think we're getting some good chats in here. A few of these we're going to answer as we go along, so we're not going to ignore those. Jaelynn may answer some now, but we are going to answer some of these as we go forward. The one that maybe relative right now is on Facebook. I think someone posted, I have most of my full blood goats DNA tested already. How will it work when DNA testing their kids this year? Will they show as parent verified, or do I have to retest everything again?
So in that scenario, that's what we're talking about with the combo test. You're still parent verified utilizing the STR test. That's another clarification. We're not discrediting right now that this STR test is necessary for parent verification because of that database search. If we didn't have the 30,000 tests already in UC Davis, it wouldn't make sense to offer that. But so you would be utilizing that combo test. You still need to put the genome on file on the new DNA program, but you need to be able to access data from the past. So that's a transition piece. So Kyle,
and the one piece I would add in on that particular case is if a lot of your 2025 kids are going to be out of the same sire, and that's where it makes a lot of sense to pay to move that sire forward just one time, because now you're only paying that one-time fee to move to SNP test that sire that was previously STR tested, and now you can just SNP test all of those offspring on that and be able to parent verify them. So again, that's the situation by situation that we look at.
So to flip this back on you, Caleb, we've talked about the program and why we're switching. One of the biggest questions we run into and concerns of the members is what are the actual costs and what is the timeline we're looking at for UC Davis?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest things that people are wondering and seeing different things out there. And so let's talk about the price to start with. So when we contracted with UC Davis to do this, we're going to be very transparent, okay? Our contract price for a SNP test only is $59. The board has approved a $1 research fee at the face-to-face. This was a motion that was made and approved. And then the board has also approved a $2 staff handling fee. So that's going to bring the members total to $62. So a question you may have, and that's for SNP testing only. If we talk about the combo test, that through UC Davis is contracted at $93, plus the $1 research fee and the $2 staffing fee. And that staffing fee, what that is to cover some of the overhead and the labor that we have in office to process through the results, to go through and make sure and submit the information to UC Davis, to make sure those emails are sent out to you when the results are brought back into the office, all the stuff Jaelynn is doing. And if you know DNA testing, you know that communication is there, is to cover that. Truthfully, does that fully cover our cost? Absolutely not. But we are trying not to pass on any extra cost to members right now, knowing that we fully realize an STR test alone was $35. And now we're talking about a $62 SNP test. And so that's a substantial increase. We understand that. Again, the question that the board asked themselves when they made this decision is, do we stay with the outdated technology so it's cheaper for our members, or do we move forward so we're collecting information that can help us in the future make better decisions? And that was the decision that was made. So at the end of the day, a SNP test only will cost you $62. A combo test, so to do a SNP test on a current animal and an STR test on that same animal to compare back to parent verified to already STR tested animals, would be $96. The parentage search will still be available for $5. That's our contracted price through UC Davis. So if you want to do a parentage search, you are able to do that. As far as, okay, can we now do our own testing rather than go through ABGA? Can I do SNP testing through UC Davis alone? They do not offer SNP testing to the public. So we are the only entity that they are going to offer SNP testing on goats to. So currently, if you want a goat SNP tested, you will have to submit that through ABGA. You don't have the option of sending it in by yourself. Eventually, if they feel there's a strong enough demand and maybe other breeds of goats some dairy breeds or different things that they test, switch to SNP testing. They said there is a chance that they will make that available, similar to how STR is available to the public and not only through ABGA. The one thing that all of the staff at UC Davis told us was that those prices that the public would pay are going to be significantly higher, was the word that was used, told to us by the public, because we have a negotiated cheaper rate by the volume that we're expected to do with UC Davis. So this is the cheapest rate that you're going to be able to get to utilize this technology through UC Davis. As far as a timeline, we are going to have the rollout essentially starts on January 15th. So a week from today, you will be able to request SNP testing on your offspring, on any of your current animals or previously tested samples. So you will be able to request a SNP test be done on a DNA sample starting on January 15th. STR testing alone will end on February 1st, because that was the agreement with UC Davis that the board made, was that the only way to do an STR test was to do an STR and a SNP test combo. And so if you want to do an STR test, we are giving you till February 1st to request those to be able to only do an STR test. At that point, any untested requests for STR. So currently, Jaelynn, you can hit on this a little bit, but we have samples or requests for STR tests that may go back as far as 6 months or 2 months. That 2 months ago, a member requested a DNA test be done on STR. And Jaelynn, how far back do those go?
Those go back all the way to about 2018-ish. They go back pretty long time.
So we will give members a grace period through April 1st. So if you have requested to do an STR test, but have not sent in the sample to fulfill that STR only test, you will have through April 1st to do that test. At that point in time, STR testing alone, UC Davis will no longer offer that service through ABGA. So that's the cutoff at that point. And again, the cutoff for STR only test is February 1st, and you will be able to start doing SNP tests on January 15th. Let's see, there was a question on here that's going to lead us into the next one. With this increased cost, or just in general, Paige, is this mandatory?
No. So that's the biggest question right now. And the biggest, I would hazard to say, outrage is that this is going to be mandatory. As a board, as a committee, we understand that we cannot request this to be mandatory to the membership at the current rate. It's not financially feasible for smaller breeders or large breeders. When we look at close to $100 a head extra cost, we don't expect it. We are excited at the opportunity to start gathering this data, but per our Rule 801, as of September 2021, the DNA testing is on a voluntary basis. It must be requested through the ABGA. That being said, we would like to see requirements eventually. Speaking on behalf of the committee, I believe that there's a lot of breeders out there that would love to see that. I would look at, we are waiting on grants and funding and price negotiations as we get our volume up or have guarantees on volumes. I think we can look at price negotiation maybe a little bit. But we understand right now financially, this is not something that we expect our membership to take on as a burden for their entire herd. We would like to see some sires coming in that are impactful on the industry, obviously. But at this time, there's been no timeline established for DNA to be required. So that is a huge sticking point online. I know that with this rollout, this has been almost 4 years in the making. There's nothing happens fast, right, guys? So I can assure you, on on my vote as a board member as of current that it is not going to happen anytime soon.
Before we jump into the next question, I do see one that we've maybe covered a little bit from a Facebook one that Jaelynn brought over. If I have a deceased sire who is STR tested, if I do the STR and SNP combo test on his offspring, they can be parent verified to that deceased sire and then move forward on the SNP test. And
Yes.
that would be 100% correct. That would be the way you could do that. Is that you can definitely run that STR combo test back. We're able to parent verify that.
And to even take that a step further, I know we'll cover ownership here later, but say this is a buck that you owned, you were the last owner on. If you were that, you can move that sample that's sitting at UC Davis. They have kept all remaining parts of your sample. If you sent in a good chunk of hair when you pulled that sample, it's still there. So they can move him forward. If you do have a ton of offspring of him, they can move that forward into the S&P if you so wish.
Another question that came in here that we aren't going to answer later, and I think we can just talk about now. Will there be anything on the registration papers that shows which DNA type test was done on that animal?
At this point right now, we are working with what can be listed on our registration paper. This is a discussion that we're going to be taking to the board when we look at the rule changes. As most of you that are interested in DNA have looked through our ABGA rules, and you see that they're not current as far as our approved facility and the processes that we're utilizing for UC Davis. So we are cleaning that up. That is one of the things that we're going to be proposing to the board, is that distinction of if it's a SNP tested parent verified versus an STR parent verified. I think that it just helps give you a little bit more value for your test, right? So ultimately, if you look on these social media platforms, the major discussion is, what is my value going forward? And that being one of them, that designation on your paper. And then also, as we look back, to touch back on what Jaelynn said earlier about not losing any of that previous data for the STR parent verified. If you look on iCompete at the pedigrees, SQ, PQ, that is still on your pedigrees. It doesn't list at the name on the animal anymore, like when you do a herd book search, but it does show it in the iCompete pedigree. So if you were one of those people that tested for the last 8 generations on your herd, you were sire qualified, that still shows up in your iCompete pedigree. And that's something that I think is a kind of a misconception out there. I know myself, I don't look at my pedigrees very often anymore, especially on iCompete. I don't dig into it as much as I used to on the blue screen. So something to go for the membership to go look at and see that it is still there.
Okay, so we talked about this increased cost and how a SNP test alone is $62. The combo is $96. Kyle, Paige mentioned at the very beginning, there was some some board approval back in 2022 for some investments into the DNA program and the transition. Is the board still going forward with that? And what are we as ABGA offering members for any type of subsidies in this transition?
Yeah, this has been another one of those very hot topic issues, and has been a discussion up, and just a couple of days ago, Paige and I still discuss things that people have brought to our attention and suggestions, and still discussed it late at night again a couple of nights ago. But at the end of the day, the $100,000 the board approved through the budget to go ahead and spend, and we are doing so, continuing with the $50 per member voucher. I think a better way to look at that is not $50 for one head. That's $50 lump sum. So somebody that has, there's already a very strong division amongst some members as far as classifying themselves as a mom and pop or a smaller breeder versus a large nationally known firm, and so this is the most fair way that we could find to do this. And I think it's best described as a lump sum, not per animal. So if you only, if there's not classifications of type of member based on how many animals you have or anything like that. If you've paid your dues and you're following the rules, you are a member of this association, and you're just as equally as important as everybody else is, in this association. And so you expect the same treatment, the same benefits, the same everything as your fellow members are receiving. And so, if you're somebody that has 9 percentage does and you've decided you're going to go hardcore and really improve, and you went out and you splurged and bought a really high, powerful, full blood buck, that $50, you're most, it doesn't make sense for me to tell you get 5 $10 vouchers when really your biggest asset in your herd at that point in time is your high powered full blood buck that you went and splurged on, versus somebody else who has 300 does and runs multiple bucks. They're still getting the same $50. It still equals out to being spread out, but it's best looked at as a lump sum versus a per animal basis. And again, that was in an effort to keep the equality as best as we could and represent everyone in this association.
Perfect. So I'm going to summarize a little bit. And again, if you watch the finance, what I'm going to call the budget meeting at the end of December, when the board approved the budget, this was discussed. Is now the time to do this 100,000? Is the time going forward? The board did vote and stay committed to this, and so that is going forward. The board wants to help subsidize those, and it will be a $50 voucher on your first invoice for whether you want to bring an old STR tested animal or multiple of those forward, whatever your first invoice over $50 is, which will be any SNP tested, obviously, will be over $50. You can use this towards that. It is one voucher per member, as Kyle stated, and so this will be reevaluated till July 1st. So you have till July 1st to be guaranteed a voucher on the first 2,000 members. We would love if we ran out of the 2,000 vouchers by July 1st, but the DNA committee and the board felt like that was a number that we would make sure and utilize. Any member that wants to do a DNA test, bring something forward, test new animals, they would be able to utilize those vouchers. Again, you can test 10 animals and get a $5 discount on each animal. You can look at it however you want. It's a one-time $50 voucher per member. So Paige, I'm going to ask you, why did we do a $50 voucher per member? Why didn't we use that 100,000 to test existing animals in the STR system to move those forward, so members didn't have to pay for that? Why was the decision for the ABGA not to use this 100,000 to move all those animals, for as many animals as we could forward? That's maybe a common question, or that thought that maybe that's a good use for the money. What was the thought process behind the DNA committee?
So this is where I tie back into, this is a almost 4-year discussion, how we spend that $100,000, right? I can tell you guys, I've spent hours and hours and hours of my life on meetings discussing this scenario right here. That 100,000 to the 30,000 samples we have on site with UC Davis, right? I don't know what animals are impactful on your herd. Right now, we only have one real measure to show an animal, well, two measurements to show success of an animal. One is progeny, and the second is ennoblement, right? And I can tell you, one of the most impactful sires of my herd never showed a day in his life, right? So for me and the committee to make the decisions on which animals are most impactful in this country was a tall task, right? To go through 30,000 animals, type them into iCompete, do the research, look at all these metrics to see which animals were impactful. I know there has been previous committee members that have spent countless hours combing through that data, trying to make heads nor tails of what animals were impactful. And to be honest with you, there's no perfect answer. Hence why we came up with the voucher. Because that way, if you want to pull an animal forward that you feel that you previously tested and you say, hey, these $2 are super impactful on my herd, now you've got a $25 voucher for each one of those animals to be pulled forward, right, into the new technology. So that's kind of where we left it, is we wanted to put it back in the membership's hands of, say, okay, these are the animals that I feel are impactful in my herd, whether they're already tested or they need to be tested new. Because some members are new. Some members don't have animals in UC Davis, but that doesn't mean that their genetic material isn't important to be switched over to the new system, right? So this is something that we've worked really hard looking at, and there's in the case of negotiations, no one ever comes out a totally happy partner, right? And when we've gone through 4 years of negotiations on this 100,000, I don't think there's anybody that's super duper happy with this idea, but I also think it's a good olive branch and a good way to start the process of this transition. Like we talked at the beginning of this talk, it is a transition period for our association. That dollar amount, that $100,000, was earmarked as a transition money from one technology to the new technology. And that's what we're doing with this. There is a proposal out there to utilize it as a per head sort of situation, whether it be 10, 25, whatever. This is tying back to Kyle's scenario that he said, how do you designate between a large breeder and a small breeder? Who is more impactful? Some of the best bucks I've ever seen have come from a herd that maybe has 10 animals. I've also seen there's big names and big firms in our industry that really make an impact off of hundreds of head. So it's really hard for me to know what animals are impactful in the industry, and that's why we put it back to that voucher. Because if I have 10 animals on an invoice or I have one animal on the invoice, I'm still deciding which animals I'm utilizing it towards. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's the best one I've got.
Perfect.
To touch base on a question though here quick, yeah. Kyle or Caleb, sorry. There is a chance that the question here is 2,000 tests, we have 7,000 members. Is there a chance that all the vouchers get used and some members miss out? Yes, that is a strong possibility. Given the financial, the increase in the price of this and the financial burden of these tests, we as a board do not predict that there's going to be a ton of testing done in the next 6 months. That's why we put the limit to test this voucher system out. We wanted to reevaluate it. So your voucher is got an expiration date. Your voucher is the first 2,000 members is expiring on July 1st. The board will, if there's any funds left over of that $100,000, we will reevaluate at that point how to utilize that for a transition. That being said, if we get 2,500 requests coming in, then we will have to address that. So
we hope we get that problem.
Yes.
Jaelynn, I don't know if you have the numbers on kind of how many members are currently tested. I know you were going to try to run some reports as we're in this transition. I think it's fair to say that they decided this because there's significantly less than 2,000 members actively DNA testing right now.
We have about 500 members throughout the year that have DNA tested, and those tests vary. They fluctuate month by month. But as of right now, for the year of 2024, it was 500 members.
Okay, so that goes there, Ian. There is a chance that we did it. One that I'll answer real quick, and then Jaelynn will go tie in one of the other questions to our next question here. Someone asked, I think on Facebook, what is the bring forward cost? So that moving forward cost, that's going to be referring to a STR tested animal to do a SNP test on those. That would be $62. It's going to be the same. It's the same cost. It doesn't matter if we collected the sample 10 years ago or we do it today. For UC Davis, they look at it the same. That's a sample. And so even if that sample was in there and was the original sample we tested in April of 2014, that's a DNA sample that they have to run that on. So Jaelynn, a couple things. What will they need to submit a new sample to upgrade from STR to SNP? Kind of answered that already, but go into a little more detail on that. And then what do they need for a SNP test? Is it any different? Do they need to collect anything different for SNP testing compared to what members are used to collecting for STR tests?
So any old samples that have been submitted previously that is on file with UC Davis, if there is enough hair and or semen left, they can use that to SNP test. Now, if there's not enough hair follicles or anything like that, then it is a possibility that the member may have to provide a new sample. Those vary on case by case, and to be honest, we probably have only gotten less than 10 of those. So that possibility is slim, but it is still a chance that that could be. Now, for SNP testing, instructions stay the same. You can pull hair, you can also provide semen and or blood. So those are the 3 different sample options that you can provide to UC Davis. Nothing will be different. The form will stay the same. Instructions will stay the same. Processing and handling will all be the same.
Perfect. Someone did ask here, when will SNP testing be available again? That will be available to request starting on January 15th. We're getting those forms, voucher system, everything ready for that to roll out on January 15th for SNP testing to be available. UC Davis is ready for us. They've got the chips, essentially is what the term is, ready. One note that I will put in, we haven't discussed, UC Davis does require 24 tests to run an array on those. So if you send that right in, it may have a little bit of delay because they are going to require 24 tests being on hand before they run that. So we do want that information to be known. That is a benefit for us, though. We talked UC Davis versus Neogen. Paige mentioned earlier, Neogen was 96 samples. So the wait time would have obviously been a little longer depending on the timing of how many samples came in. That Neogen only needs UC Davis only needs 24 to run their array to be able to do that. Speaking of Neogen, we have a question on here. Can Neogen test samples be compatible with UC Davis testing?
So once again, I'll say what Kyle said earlier. I'm not a geneticist, so I fully say that up front. From my understanding, talking to Neogen and then talking to UC Davis, there is a chance that those 2 SNP tests will be compatible in the future. What that would take on the association if we wanted to do some sort of collaboration or something like that would be a data dump, and it would be a collaborative effort with a company like Neogen or Zetosis or somebody like that. I know that one of the biggest sells with Neogen in the discussions was the international data collection. They do a lot of international work. So we're not looking short-sighted on that. We are still keeping that idea of collaboration efforts in the back of our mind. We are not limiting ourselves. That's the cool part about this, guys, is SNP technology gives us the opportunity to move and advance with the industry and the industry, or like the livestock industry, not just the goats, right? We can move and advance along the sheep or the cattle and learn from their mistakes and really advance at an accelerated rate comparatively to the STR. The STR, Caleb, you put it exactly right. We were stuck with 12 to 19 markers, and that's it. There is no expanding that. STR was very limited in its capabilities. SNP technology gives us very unlimited scope of possibilities.
Very good. Paige, we're going to go back to you, and this is a hot topic for discussion amongst people, so I'll let you tackle it. Who owns the DNA sample?
Okay, so there was a couple different ways that you could submit DNA in the past. You could go directly through UC Davis and have your own account and then submit the results, have them submit the results of that DNA test to the ABGA. We do not have access to those samples. So as far as moving those samples forward, that would be on the responsibility of the member to get those retested with the SNP technology, and they'd have to submit that to the ABGA. The samples are stored at UC Davis and are there for the rights of use for any research or development. That is all the ABGA's. They're technically the ABGA's samples, right? Because they were submitted into our system. That also, when we talk about some of that, the hot topic is, I don't want you cloning my animal, right? That is not what we are here to do with those samples. It is strictly for research and development of future programs such as genomic EPDs or research on markers for disease resistance. What we actually own is the DNA results, right? And that's the part that's that we're more interested in, is that list of markers. So right now, and I know this analogy does not always bring up the happiest thing. Right now, we are buying the book, right? We don't know how to read the book, but we are buying the book off the shelf, right? We're going to learn how to read it. As we find these markers and develop it, we will learn how to read what coat color marker is, or what disease resistant. Hopefully someday in the future, we have a marker for CL resistance. That would be really cool. It's going to take a lot of research and development to get there, but that would be one of the things that we're striving to do, right? When we look at that, that is our goal with these results. We're not out there to clone your animal. We are strictly gathering this data for research and development, and that is it. And then we're not alone in that. It is industry standard that ultimately the registry, like the ABGA, has ownership of the sample once it's been submitted.
I was just going to flip over to Kyle as an Angus breeder. If you submit DNA on your Angus bull or your Angus heifer, we're not doing anything different than any other breed association.
Absolutely not. You go online, you either register that calf or get a working number for that animal, so you can submit the data or the sample. You fill it all out through the association, through AGI. They send it off to Neogen or Zoetis or whoever lab they send it to. It comes back through, the information comes back through the data points through like their version of Jaelynn. It gets inputted into the system. EPDs get updated. Parentage is verified. All that. We're not reinventing the wheel on any of this. That we are just following suit of all the other livestock associations.
And at that point in time, the Angus Association owns that DNA sample and the results of that.
Exactly, and you want to talk about an association that is constantly evolving with new EPDs and researching what other markers can affect. I mean, just in my short time at Seidenstrickers, and we went from the normal data collection of hip heights and weights and all that to collecting foot scores, teat and udder scores, hair shedding scores. All that was within a 2-year time frame that we added all these new things we started collecting data on and submitting. So once the ball gets rolling, it can start rolling really fast.
All right, real quick to hit on a question coming from a member. I have run all my DNA tests on a personal account prior to this, those STR tests. Will I be able to run a SNP test through ABGA on my samples that I have done on my personal account? You're muted, Paige.
So we have talked to UC Davis about this. We need to clarify if it's a written permission sort of situation that you were able to transfer, but ultimately that sample will be run through and submitted into the ABGA database. So there will no longer be you owning your separate sample and then be able to put it into your database, because UC Davis does not provide this service to anybody that's not an ABGA member for the goat industry right now. And we have like you said, an exclusive cost point on that because of our contract. So what we are going to have to look into. And with any of these topics, please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions or you like to see or you have suggestions on how to make this a better program moving forward. We would need to get a permission to move that information over. You would need to contact UC Davis and say, hey, any animals that I want to submit for SMP that I request through the office would need to be moved out of my account into the ABGA's file.
Follow up that we just got in here that from Facebook. Why can't we give ABGA access to our private account? We need to combine all previous results into one database.
Yeah, so that file is along the same lines of if you give us permission or you give UC Davis permission, you would have to reach out specifically to UC Davis at that point and give them permission to go into your database and pull that sample. You'll have to request that then through that testing through the ABGA, but you have to give permission first to UC Davis, if that makes sense.
And that might be, I had that question sent to me today earlier personally, and as I told them, that's going to be something that as we start to figure these things out, we need to come together, as a DNA committee and the four of us on here, sit down with UC Davis and maybe try to simplify that process in a form or something that the members can sign and give that written permission for those animals and try to make it as user friendly as possible to get those transferred to our account.
What it would take, like I said, is permission given to UC Davis to transfer them, and then the request come from our office. So you'd have to go through our form that's going to be online. Right now, it is the same as it was with the STR testing. It will be available on our website. It will not be through iCompete currently. That is something that we are hoping to roll out in the next 6 months. We are very excited about the capabilities of iCompete. But right now we're trying to keep things as the same as possible for the membership as far as how you go and request your DNA sample. So you would have to contact UC Davis with your private account, let them know that you would like to give access to the ABGA, and then go ahead and request that DNA sample on the ABGA website. So it's pretty simple. It's just you are responsible for releasing your own data.
So there was a question we'll address later about if you don't own a buck. So if you asked that question, I think Jaelynn responded to you privately here on our chat, but we will address that here in just a minute. Going back to the ownership of the samples, should members be concerned, Kyle, that the ABGA shares ownership of a sample?
And no, and like to reiterate, Paige's points, we're not out here. You own the actual DNA of that animal. That is your property. All we are interested in is the data we can receive off of that. That's all the only interest is as far as an association or as UC or even UC Davis is interested in. And by having all this, by going through the association and letting us to negotiate these things, we're like we've hit on all night. It's by us having that control, we're getting those price breaks. And if something happens that we do change companies or UC Davis wants to stop or whatever a hypothetical scenario is, you have us lobbying for you as a membership or to protect your DNA, protect your money and your investment. And it just opens up so much more opportunity. Again, going back to an Angus example, we personally use 6 to 10 AI sires every breeding season. Like tonight, I was in a hurry. I could have forgot to write one down that I bred this evening. If that allows me then to, when that calf's born, submit that blood sample and say, hey, here's the 10 bulls that it could be out of. And because all that's in the association's database, they don't have to go look for permission from 10 different breeders of that bull. They can run it instantly, provide the feedback, get my calf registered, move on. Lots of instances like that. This is all, by having it centrally located, it's providing that better service to our membership.
Very good. All right, Jaelynn, who gets a copy of the DNA report listing the markers?
So the only one that gets a copy of the DNA report is the current owner of the animal. No other person gets a copy of that results report. If you would like other people to receive that report, you yourself as the member would have to send that over to whoever you would like to have that information.
And then we as the ABJ get a copy of that and keep that on file.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. Can I get other animals' DNA results?
No. Now, DNA tests stick with the animal. So let's say you do transfer ownership over to a new member, and that member does request the DNA results. Since they do own that animal and it has been DNA is on file, they can request that report.
Very good. All right, now kind of this one gets to the question we had. So the question we had ourselves to prepare was, if I want to test an animal I own and parent verify to a sire I do not own, what would that process be? And that's similar to a question we got from a member. What if you need a DNA test for parentage on 2 bucks from a flush, but you don't own one of the sires to get the SNP test done? Paige, what's that look like?
So in that scenario, you have a couple options. One of them is the current way that we do things, where you have to receive written permission to submit a new sample, right? So if I bought a buck and there was the owner of that buck died, right? And I would need permission from his next of kin, or even if that member was still owned it, the buck was still alive, but they hadn't submitted DNA, I would need written permission from them to submit semen on their behalf, right? And that is in our rules. That is the way it's always been done. The other option you have is if that animal has been previously STR tested, you would be able to utilize the database search from UC Davis and do a combo test, right? So that's back where we get that database and those previous tested samples. So say you did do a flush to a national grand champion that you didn't own, you could go ahead, as long as he's in the STR database, you could do that combo test and still have access to him, right? So there's a few different ways we can do about it, but under the current rules, you have to have written permission from the owner of the sire to send in semen semen on that buck.
Or in this case, if there was previously STR tested, and even so you could test back to that one, but if you're wanting to move that one, so you can STR your kid, and because that's in the database, we can verify it to them that's been STR tested. But if you want to SNP test and and have that animal SNP test and you don't own it, you cannot bring it forward without the owner's permission.
Yeah, so this gets back to the situation where we're talking genetic impact. So if I say I went through and bred 10 does to Kyle's buck, and I need to make sure that they're actually out of his buck and not the cleanup buck, and I have to run parentage on 10 head, it doesn't make sense for me to do the STR test combo test on every one of those 10 babies, right? So in that scenario, I would get a hold of Kyle and say, hey, I will pay to move your buck forward, or can we come to an agreement on how to move your buck forward? That's between you and the breeder. And then you need to submit written permission from that breeder, signed written permission to move that buck forward in the system if they were previously STR sampled. So it's very similar to the way we've always done it as far as testing an animal that's not owned by you.
Very good. Let's see. Jaelynn, what happens if I parent verify an animal and the results come back sire excluded under the new SNP testing?
So that process will still stay the same of how we have been doing it in the past with STR. None of that will change. So whenever that animal comes back as sire excluded, we can do our research, talk to the member, develop a plan, and then execute it the same way as we've been doing it.
Very good. Let's see. Kyle, will DNA be used for research?
UC Davis reserves the right to use that sample for research. Again, as we've hit on, as an association, the members are asking for more information, whether that be disease or parasite resistance or anything like that. That requires research to get there. That is part of the goal here, is that yes, that your sample can be used for research. But again, going back to one of those previous points, by doing it through the association, we help lobby that it's for the entire membership that it is being used correctly. That's another benefit, like we talked on. But yes, that is a goal of this program.
And Kyle, you and I are on the same page on this, and I don't have this in our kind of Q&As that we're going through, but this does offer the opportunity, and we're not going to open the can of worms on EPDs and things, but this does offer that going down the road, that if as an association we choose to start collecting performance data and developing some EPDs, we could now have genomically enhanced EPDs. And so that's where most of the cattle breed associations are at. And that's something that as an association we'll have to decide if we want to go down that. I think we've got most of it. We're kind of wrapping up. So members, if you're still on with us, we appreciate it. If you have any questions, now's the time to make sure and get in on the Teams or Facebook live chat. Because Kyle, we're going to go to you and give us a summary on what SNP testing, or SNP as we've called it through the night, can and cannot do.
And even going back to the STR days, I've heard this question so many times. Well, you'll be able to tell me if that animal was, if somebody lied on their papers and that animal's actually half whatever. No, that's not how any of this works. You can only run it back to what is there to run it to. So that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions I hear, is we'll be able to determine breed makeup or anything like that. No, that's not how any of it works. That's probably the biggest one I hear.
So things that it can do, it can more accurately determine parentage than what STR testing was. We know that because we're testing, as you said earlier, 10 times the amount of markers, and we can verify parents between full siblings that STR testing alone cannot do. It gives us essentially 70,000 markers for these goats to have. Now, can we read those, as Paige talked about earlier? No, the answer is no to this, right? Is that we cannot. Although we have those 70,000 different gene markers on that animal's genome, that doesn't mean that we know exactly what that tells us just yet. But that gives us the data to go forward with. So some things it cannot do, as Kyle stated, it doesn't give us a set of EPDs. When you test them, you're not going to magically now have EPDs. We're not going to be able to tell whether they're disease resistant right now. Any of these things right now we cannot do. It gives us the opportunity to find those answers as we go forward. And so, as Kyle mentioned, we can't tell breed percentage. We can't tell, hey, is this one actually a full blood or is it a percentage? How high is the percentage? Currently, we can't do any of those answers. Hopefully down the road, through research and collaboration, we can get those answers.
So I'd like to piggyback on like one more in summary kind of question that has come up too, is what happens when a buck doesn't match what is pedigree? That's been one that just popped in on my messages here. That is a scenario that happens with the STR testing. It will be handled the same way. So Jaelynn will let you know, you'll get your response or you'll get your results. It is up to the member to make sure that pedigree is updated. We are constantly working on how to improve member experience. Right now, this last week, we had a meeting with our office staff to look at how we can integrate iCompete more into the requests of testing, and then also eventually requesting or submitting phenotypical data or different data to help us towards this research. We are constantly working on how to develop this more. And we look at how to make things more streamlined and user friendly. So as iCompete has now gone digital, we have so many opportunities as far as sharing those results in real time as soon as we get them back from UC Davis. It won't be an email, it will be on your animal's genetics tab. Like, there's so many things that we're working on to help improve membership experience with the DNA program, that I just ask that the membership realize that it does take time, but we are working towards these goals of submitting data and starting the process. So we're working hard. We have great volunteers, great staff, and I really do thank everybody that has put in time and effort to get to this point, because it has been 4 years in the making.
And to piggyback on that, this takes participation from all of us. It does no good for anybody just to sit back and cross their arms and get bowed up over it. Even if you don't agree with EPDs or some part of this that you don't necessarily agree with fully, we still need everyone to come together and participate. And that's the only way that any of this grows, is by member input and member participation in any aspect of anything this board puts out. It takes you guys to step up and participate and show us where those problems are, raise those questions, and help us grow everything that we try to accomplish.
100%. And so someone put on, I think, Facebook, how we're going to collect data, and Paige kind of talked that, how are we going to collect data on what the markers represent? We're at the beginning infancy stages of that, figuring out what information we do need to collect, how we're going to collect that. As a member, you can start collecting information now. I think those are good things for you to collect. The age-old saying is, you can't improve what you don't measure. And so if as a member you're collecting that data and you have that in there, as we start to put some of this in, you may have data. I'm sure we have members that are collecting maybe birth weights or weaning weights or different things on their goats already. Those are things that will be valuable to you and to the association going forward. We're looking at, the DNA committee will talk about ways to do this, but some options, sire testing, and doing that helps a lot. And so doing some sire tests and collaborating with universities to create some sire tests, to collect data on those sires, and even to breed those to multiple different conglomerates of animals to be able to do some performance testing. Those are ways to rapidly get some information about that. And by rapidly, we're constrained to the generational interval of a goat. And so when we're talking rapidly, that's probably still a year, right? I mean, we're a year, 2 years as we're looking at progeny testing some of these sires. But it's a slow process, but it's a process that if we don't start, we'll never get there. And just because we don't have it now, to me, it's a real bad attitude to take of, well, we've never collected data, we haven't had that, it's going to take us so long, so let's just stay where we're at. To me, that is an attitude that'll never progress our association forward. And we've got to look and say, hey, just because we're 10 years behind, if we wait till next year, that just means we're 11 years behind, and let's start now.
So, and to piggyback off that a little bit, Caleb, we need to look at technology, right? This is a transitioning of a technology. And the other thing that I want to touch base on is, you talk about collecting the data. We are partnering with UC Davis, with other universities, to make sure that how we collect this phenotypical data is correct, right? And we don't make stupid mistakes up front, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The rest of the industry the livestock industry is already doing these things. So we have the advantage of coming on this. Yes, we're the new kids on the block, but we get to learn from everybody else's mistakes. And the other thing is, we have iCompete. Now, if you would have told me a year ago that iCompete would be a great asset to our association, I would have laughed. But now we are fully digital. We are making improvements on the daily to that system. We have a hardworking staff that is really knowledgeable in what it takes to update iCompete. It's no longer, well, is this a future type thing? This is, let's do this in the next 6 months and get it executed, right? So I think for the membership, there's a lot of really cool and exciting things moving forward. I know For example, Kyle, there was a couple people from your region that were on the DNA committee that were big into fecal testing, right? They were looking at those fecal egg counts, and that they have tons of data, just a wealth of knowledge. I'm excited to work with producers like that and start getting conversations with UC Davis on how we can start utilizing that data. Because at the end of the day, we get enough of it together that it starts to create patterns. And that's where the genomic EPDs and the markers start to show up, is when we start identifying those patterns. So I think that there's a huge future in front of us. This is a huge step, guys. The fact that we are moving this technology and moving forward, I'm really excited.
Very good. We had one last question, and we've kind of answered it, but we'll answer it again. I have frozen embryos where I use 2 different straws / sires, and both are deceased, but DNA is on file. I unfortunately don't own the bucks, so I do not have access to their DNA. What would the process be of registering kids from this situation? So again, they could do the combo test, and because if those animals were already DNA tested and on file with ABGA, if you do a combo test and STR your kids back to verify, you can select those 2 sires as the optional parents and do the STR test back to them to parent verify. If you would like to move those forward, you would have to contact the owner of those bucks and get permission to move them forward. But if you only have, again, it's probably how many frozen embryos you have and how many kids you're wanting to register on what's the more cost-effective way to do that. Anything else from you guys before we wrap up? So I want to thank Paige and Kyle and Jaelynn for their work on this. Jaelynn works so hard in the office on DNA and answers questions. Paige and Kyle, as our chair and co-chair of the DNA, and the rest of the DNA committee, thank you guys for your work. I know there's lots of people that have worked on this over the past 3 to 4 years. And so lots of your hard work is coming to fruition, even if maybe there was a thing, whether it wasn't the voucher, you had a different idea about the voucher, or you had a different idea on what company that we should use. I think everyone that has been behind this DNA side of things should be very excited that we're moving forward. And I hope that as members, we can move forward together and support this and realize that a step is a step and we're in the right direction. And so maybe it's not the exact, again, voucher system or the exact company or different things, but we are making progress. And at the end of the day, this DNA plan and this transition period was developed to adapt to modern DNA technology that will allow us to improve the boar goat's place in the industry and kind of be reflective to what most of the other species are doing. And this gives us the technology to find new answers, to find new information. And so, again, this is headed in the right direction. And the goal of this is not to increase the cost or increase the burden on the membership. The goal of this is to use this as an additional tool to serve our members and all ABGA members and boar goat breeders, so we can get more information and you can know more about your goats. So I think maybe a couple more posts are coming in. A member did mention that ABGA has tried to collect data for EPDs more than once. Again, it will be a challenge, but that is something that we're looking at. We know that there will be a challenge on that and how to get members to participate and all of the issues that are there. The comment specifically was there are too many variables in the way goats are raised to make EPDs beneficial. I'd be pretty confident, Kyle, in saying that we don't raise goats in any more variables than Angus cattle or Hereford cattle or Hampshire pigs or Yorkshire, some different variations that we see. And pigs might not be a good example because a lot of those are raised in confinements or different things. But as far as beef cattle goes, as we compare to our other ruminant species, those variables are out there. There's a way to collect that data, and there is a way to get that going. So,
well, and to piggyback on that, it's not just EPDs. There's other scenarios where these markers are extremely important. Let's look at scrapie. you haven't identified for a scrapie resistant gene, right? We can get that with other disease resistance. The world is our oyster at this point with what we can and can't research. So we have to get member input on what are important factors for them that we're looking for. It doesn't have to be just EPDs. It can be coat color. It can be structure details. It can be a lot of things. It can be disease resistance. We have a lot of avenues to look at. So it's exciting, and we need to look future forward.
Exactly. I hit on this at the face-to-face, but we don't, at this point, we truly do not know how color is expressed in these things. There's so many of our members that is their focus is colored genetics. If and that's back to adding that value and that return on investment. If you can DNA that animal and know that she is, recessive or homozygous recessive or homozygous or heterozygous or any however all this ends up working out, that's a marketing tool for you. If you can say, hey, this one is homozygous dominant for color, that's a marketing tool. If you're somebody's chasing color, she now has more value to that program. So it's all like Paige said, whatever is important to you, it's there in the DNA. We just have to find the niche and the money and the desire to go chase it.
Very good. Well, as we wrap up, I want to thank the members for sticking with us through the original technical difficulty, and whether you jumped onto our Teams meeting or stayed on the reboots on Facebook Live, sticking with us for, I guess, now a full 2 hours. We will get these. This will be on our Facebook page. We'll also share the recording of the Teams meeting platform that we're on here to the website. So if people don't have Facebook, you can share that out with them, that they can go onto the website and see this. We hope this was beneficial. We hope that you can see we want to be transparent about it. We want members to know what's going on, and we're not trying to spring these things on you. And that's what this was about, and we'll continue to try to provide members that information to be able to move forward. So with that, I think we'll wrap up. Thanks to Kyle and Paige and Jaelynn, and they were the brains behind this and the idea to get this out to the members. So I appreciate them and coming on and answering all these questions.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone have a good night.